Congressman, another area where there's a lack of transparency from the administration is the ongoing military efforts in Venezuela. Very little information officially has been disclosed, albeit the president was rambling in a radio interview and said that America hit some sort of facility on Venezuelan land. The New York Times is reporting there was actually a CIA covert operation.
Not very covert.
Not very covert if it was like that. But it goes to two things. Number one, you hear CIA covert operations in Latin America and all the horrors of El Salvador and Nicaragua that happened in the 80s just come to the forefront of the mind, and that's just, you don't want to go in that direction. But number two, there is no authorization for the use of military force for the United States to operate a land war in Venezuela. What does the Congress know? When will the Congress be better informed? And at what point is this an illegal war?
Well, it's illegal now. I mean, and first, let's be clear. I mean, the last brief that Congress received on just what's happening in Venezuela in its totality was a couple of weeks ago, let alone on what just happened and this ground attack here at the port. And on the boat strikes, that continues and is yet to be resolved. And now we have much more information about where those boats were actually going, not all to the United States. The fact that that in some of these boats there were likely not hard drugs that were found that the president was claiming that there was. And of course, we were killing and assassinating people with no proof of what they were actually doing or what were on these boats. And Congress has not only not been consulted, there has been actually no actual deference to the separation of powers and the authority to actually go into any type of war. Donald Trump right now is marching us into a war with Venezuela with no authorization from the Congress. And the American public should be very clear. And what drives me and a bunch of people just absolutely nuts is that Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, of the entire House, not just Speaker of Republicans, continues to do absolutely nothing. He is the most cowardly person in the entire government for not even willing to stand up to Donald Trump to say one thing to the president about the way that he continues to sidestep the Congress. And by the way, members of his own party. It's not just Democrats that are frustrated with not getting information. It's these same Republicans who are finally starting to speak out more and more, and I hope that continues.
Congressman, there are some things that are unusual and not unusual about the CIA conducting operations in Latin America. They have a long history of covert operations in Latin America. That's not unusual. It's not unusual that the U.S. government has covert action to influence or pressure governments. It's not unusual that intelligence agencies have conducted deniable sabotage operations. What is unusual is that there is not a declared conflict in Venezuela. What is unusual is that the President of the United States invoked the Alien Enemies Act, attempted to earlier this year, citing war with Venezuela when a war with Venezuela was not actually happening. And now it seems to look like that the President of the United States is actually trying to manufacture a war with Venezuela, to backstroke, as Michael Steele would say, into justification for his invoking of the Alien Enemies Act. Help me understand. Just help me understand how this is serving the American people, how this is America first, how this is focusing on the kitchen table issues. Help me understand.
There is no connection to what the American people want to what Donald Trump's actions are every single day in the public. Donald Trump should be focused on affordability, on lowering the cost of health care, on lowering the cost of rent and housing, the issues that he actually talked about in the campaign about affordability, lowering the price of groceries for American families. He's doing none of that. In fact, he's doing the opposite. He's raising prices through tariffs. And now he's marching us to a war with Venezuela. And people should be very clear. Donald Trump wants regime change in Venezuela. He wants the resources of the country. He wants to open up that exploration for God knows who and what of the multinational corporations around oil that we know Venezuela is rich with. And all of this without any sort of explanation to the American public or the Congress. I mean, we're finding out what's happening in Venezuela through reports in the press. There's no briefings that are happening, not even to Republican members of Congress. And so Donald Trump is on this thing. This is all him and his administration and an unqualified Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War or whatever the hell they're calling Pete Hegseth now. This is all on them. And so we have to be strong, and Republicans need to join us. The speaker needs to grow some, and we all need to stand up to Donald Trump and demand there's actually accountability and there's a check and balance system with the Congress.